October 29th, 2021, Game 3 of the World Series between the Atlanta Braves and the Houston Astros, at Truist Park in Cobb County, Georgia, in Smyrna, and the entire city is just ablaze with excitement over this unexpected late season run, playoff run by the Atlanta Braves, who had pretty much been decimated by injuries throughout the entire latter half of the 2021 season. But outfielder Jorge Soler, who was a late season addition to the Atlanta Braves, signed by general manager Alex Anthopoulos, he'd already hit one home run during the World Series in Game 1. He would go on to hit two more and later become the World Series MVP as the Atlanta Braves would go on to defeat the Houston Astros during the World Series. But we are talking about October 29th, 2021, Game 3. In between innings, Jorge Soler is in the outfield, and the ball is not in play, and he tosses a baseball into the stands. Really a time-honored tradition of a lucky fan being able to catch a baseball, especially during the World Series. But then something unexpected happens. 2 years later, a plaintiff, Myra Morris, would file a lawsuit against Jorge Soler and the Atlanta Braves. She claims that she was struck in the eye by the baseball thrown by Soler, taken to a medical treatment facility inside Truist Park, and sustained she is alleging some pretty catastrophic, serious injuries. And we are joined this morning here on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com by Keith Johnson. He has been consistently named one of the top 100 attorneys in Georgia. He is also a personal injury law practitioner. And Keith, isn't there some sort of recognition when you go to a baseball game that you can get hit by a ball or a bat?
Well, first, thank you for having me. That was a very impressive recollection of the 2021 World Series run. I'm an avid Braves fan, so I remember all that and brings back some really good memories. But absolutely, there is what the courts have referred to as the assumption of risk under the baseball rule. Major League Baseball, to include the Atlanta Braves, have language on any of the StubHub tickets or wherever you get your baseball tickets from that essentially states that you are consenting to attending the event, and at that event there will be live baseballs that happen to go into the stands. As you said, it's a time-honored part of baseball. That's why fans bring their baseball gloves to the stadiums. This case is interesting in that we are not talking about a foul ball. We're not talking about a bat that has slipped out of a batter's hands. We've seen that throughout the years. We're talking about a baseball that is thrown into the stands. And I think that the legal issue will be, how is that throw characterized? Is it characterized as the traditional toss after the pitcher has warmed up? The outfielder tosses it into the stands to waiting fans who are trying to get that ball as a souvenir, or as the plaintiff's attorney has described it, as an overhand, high velocity throw that went into the stands when his client was not suspecting any live game action because it was in between innings. So I think that the big thing is through the discovery process, which the attorneys will engage in, is there any video of this incident? Video would be very important to characterizing this throw. I don't think anybody is alleging that Mr. Soler had any ill intent. But what they are alleging is that he was negligent in the manner in which he tossed that ball into the stands. And so I believe that that will be the legal issue because it does go outside of the scope of the traditional baseball rule, which covers foul balls. And if you are in a part of the stadium that is uncovered, then you would assume that risk. So that's the fascinating part about this lawsuit that we have. And I must say as well, lastly, that the lawsuit comes right up against the statute of limitations. In the state of Georgia, there's a 2-year statute of limitations on all personal injury claims, or 2 years from the time that the injury should have reasonably been discovered. And so in this case, it does appear that they waited until that very 11th hour, and possibly they were trying to get the Atlanta Braves to resolve the case and settle, which happens quite often prior to the filing of a lawsuit.
And that was a great answer to a question that I was going to answer or ask next. When we first heard about this lawsuit and realized that it's almost 2 years after the fact, you know, why do you think it took so long? And you just answered that because it was a coming up against the statute of limitations. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And frequently, attorneys want to have their clients receive as much treatment as possible before engaging in any type of settlement, because you don't know what the medical expenses are going to be. It appears that some of her injuries are ongoing. She's still seeing a physician for her eye injuries. And so you want to be able to quantify what those expenses are because you only do get one opportunity to resolve a case of this nature. And so from a financial standpoint, an attorney does want to have a full picture of what the injuries are before going forward to any kind of settlement agreement or filing of a lawsuit.
Jorge Soler, as I mentioned earlier, went on to become the World Series MVP. He was not re-signed during the Braves offseason and now signed a 3-year deal with the Miami Marlins. Obviously, he's a power hitting outfielder, as evidenced by his home run total. Can obviously, you know, is probably pretty capable of really firing a baseball with a lot of velocity. But how do you prove that he intentionally threw the ball into the stands with so much force as to cause this injury? I mean, you obviously said a few moments ago, we have to find out if there's video of the incident. What other avenues does the plaintiff have to proving her allegations?
Well, that's a great point. This case, if there is not any video evidence, will kind of come down to how cases have been decided for hundreds of years in this country, and it's eyewitness testimony. We all know that video makes things more convenient and definitive, but if there are any of the patrons who are in the stands and can attest to the fact that the ball came in out of nowhere at a high velocity, then that could be evidence of his negligence. And I want to stress the word negligence versus intent, because intent is a word that we usually use with criminal offenses versus someone who is acting in a manner that they are not using the amount of care or caution that they should use and that a reasonable person would expect them to use. And so ultimately, I believe that the injuries are severe, but it does face a legal hurdle in proving that this is beyond the scope of what's customary at baseball games. The baseball rule is in full effect. Courts throughout the entire country have referred to that. Actually, in 2003, Braves great Andrew Jones was sued by a fan for a foul ball that went into the stands. The Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Andrew Jones and the Atlanta Braves in that the fan consented to at least in part assuming the risk of those type of incidents occurring. So it really will come down to whether the attorneys for the ball club are able to adequately convince a court that what Jorge Soler did is not beyond the scope of what we see baseball players do uh, every day throughout the season, because that's why fans sit where they sit. That's why they ask for those balls, and that's why more than any other sport, the fan interaction in baseball, I believe, is the most. You have ball boys along the side foul lines. They toss balls into the stands all the time. Balls are exchanged all the time. A pitcher doesn't like a ball, he throws it to the umpire tosses it, that ball goes somewhere. So I think that that's what makes baseball special. And we certainly feel horrible that Miss Norris has these injuries, but it will be a fascinating case as to how the courts interpret the baseball rule in the context of an outfielder or any player on defense throwing a ball into the stands.
What are the chances this actually ever makes it to a jury?
I think that the chances that it gets to a jury are minimal. First, the great majority of civil cases never make it to a jury. We have a tremendous backlog in the state of Georgia and throughout the country of criminal cases due to the courts being closed for about a year and a half due to the pandemic. And so the criminal cases have been taking priority in our court system to try to get back up to speed. But also, this is a case that the Atlanta Braves could easily resolve. I mean, I don't know the amount of damages that has been requested, but it appears that the medical expenses are about $60,000. So it just will first go through the discovery process, and I would suspect that the attorneys for the Atlanta Braves are going to file a motion to dismiss on summary judgment, essentially stating that this individual has not put forth the amount of evidence needed to allow this lawsuit to go forward for the reasons that we've discussed.
We're wrapping up our conversation with Georgia attorney and personal injury law practitioner Keith Johnson, talking about the lawsuit by a fan who claims that former Atlanta Braves outfielder Jorge Soler threw a baseball into the stands with such force that it caused some very serious injuries to her eye. Keith, final thoughts, just put a kind of a bow on our conversation and tell our viewers and listeners what are the major issues involved in this, and where do you think this will ultimately, or how do you think this will ultimately be resolved?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want the viewers to know that injuries at baseball stadiums are actually more frequent than one would think. I did some research and I found, according to NBC News, about 800 fans have reported serious injuries, ranging from loss of vision to having a concussion from baseballs going into the stands. And that time frame was about a 7-year time frame. So it is more frequent than you would think. I do believe that in this case, the legal hurdle of proving that Mr. Soler was negligent in his actions is going to be one that is going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult because baseball is a sport, just like I said, that has a lot of fan interaction. And to prove that his actions went beyond the scope of what we've seen time and time again in our own viewing of the sport is a very high hurdle. And so I do believe that there is not a precedent for the Atlanta Braves to necessarily resolve this case. On the front end, they had an opportunity, presumably so, to do that. And so how far is the court going to allow the baseball rule to extend is the legal question. And I do believe that it is fascinating if we look at it from the standpoint of what precedent is this going to set going forward. Lastly, baseball was proactive in 2019 after a slew of lawsuits about foul balls, and they put the netting was expanded. And so as a fan, I've sat close, and sometimes I've complained about the netting because I do like the clear view, but I certainly understand it from a legal point of view. And so I think that that will also come into play, that reasonable steps have been taken to protect fans, and that this was just an accident. And sometimes accidents happen, but they don't rise to the level of a lawsuit where the Braves would be financially responsible.
And I'm like you, I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan. I've often complained about the obstructive view behind the net, but this is just part of the nation's society and sports and legal society as well. But we are thankful to Keith Johnson for joining us on this edition of Atlanta News First on AtlantaNewsFirst.com. And this is a topic that we will continue to cover diligently, so stay with us and AtlantaNewsFirst.com for all of the latest developments, not only in this case, but in our favorite hometown team, the Atlanta Braves, as well. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to Keith Johnson for joining us here on Atlanta News First.